Welcome to Imprint, a podcast about creating a home and life you love. I'm Natalie Walton, an interior designer, stylist, and best-selling author focused on an holistic approach to homes. Each week, I'm sharing insights and interviews about the creative process to help you enhance both your interiors and well-being, as well as provide you with the tools and resources to make considered and sustainable choices with all that you create. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Imprint. I'm very excited to share today's episode with you because it's a little bit different. It's actually going to be very practical because it's based on a conversation that I had with one of my students within Design and Grow, my group coaching program for creative business owners and aspiring business owners. And I was talking to an interior designer about an upcoming photo shoot she had. She actually had it that day. She was based in the UK and she was literally in a couple of hours' time about to go on a photo shoot and photograph one of her projects. And if you have any kind of creative business, if you're an interior designer, if you have an Airbnb, maybe you have a homeware store, and you need to capture your spaces or you need to capture your products, it is so important to make sure that you make the most out of every single photo shoot because, first of all, your images matter and they have a huge impact in terms of being able to attract, prospective clients. They are what you use on your website. They are what you use on social media. So they're really important in that sense. And also to hire a photographer can be, a significant investment. So you want to make sure that you are getting the most out of your money and also that you are making the most of your time as well, because a photo shoot can involve a lot of moving parts at times. And often it is a whole day. It's a whole day of your time. So you really want to make sure that you're using your time wisely. So I am going to share some of the biggest lessons that I've learned on my journey to working on photo shoots. They are such a kind of integral part of what I do and what I've done over the past 15 years. And my first exposure to working on photo shoots was very much when I started working at ACP Magazines, as it was called back then. And at the time, I was still working as a journalist. And so I would go on these photo shoots where I would go and visit the home that was being shot for the magazine, interviewing the homeowner, and I would really see what was happening and observe, because I've always been a very keen observer of, what's going on here, and I'm watching and kind of observing the conversations between the photographer and the stylist, and then what happened when the art director came on set, or maybe the editor came on set, and what was the change in energy, or what was the conversations that were happening. And I learned so much on the job. And by the time it was time for me to kind of spread my wings and try and do these types of shoots, I already had learned so much through observation. And then, of course, when you're thrown in the deep end, you learn a whole lot more. And over the years, I have worked with a whole range of different photographers. I have predominantly worked with interior photographers, but I've also worked with fashion photographers, portrait photographers, sometimes photographers. You will get photographers who are more fashion photographers, and sometimes they will come and do interior shoots because the editor might think, oh, we want a different kind of perspective for this type of shoot. Or you might work alongside someone who's a bit more of a portrait photographer. And again, they're branching out. I went on food shoots and was working with food photographers. So there are nuances and niches within the photography industry. And they all have a slightly different way of working. And then even within interiors, you can come across different interiors photographers who have a very different way of working. This can relate to how they work technically. So it can relate to the type of equipment that they use. There were still, when I was working on magazines, there were still some photographers who were still using film, which was quite unusual at the time. Most magazines didn't like that because it cost a lot more money for them to be processing the images. Obviously, you're not seeing the shots live. So that's why photographers used to use Polaroid cameras. So they would kind of get a sense of what was happening and be able to share it with the art director or the editor. But obviously you don't know what's on the film until you get the film back. And Mikhail Vang, for some of you who are familiar with interior photographers, he was well known for doing this at the time. I'm not sure if he still does. But they gave his photography and photographs a beautiful earthiness to them, which was really lovely. And some magazines really loved that. And they actually chose him because he was still working in film. He has worked on campaigns for, like he used to do things with Anthropology. He used to do things with Gourmet Traveler, Vogue Living, a whole range of different publications. And I remember working with him, and it was really interesting to see how he worked in that sense. So there's the technology component, and then you can kind of get even more granular with that in terms of some photographers will shoot what's called handheld, and they will just shoot in a way that, they're not attached to a tripod. This doesn't tend to be typical for an interiors photographer. Generally, interiors photographers, because they're trying to line up all the perpendicular lines, the horizontal lines, generally they tend to be on a tripod. So it's unusual for somebody to go handheld, but people who are more in fashion or lifestyle will go more handheld, and you get a different result. So it's good to know that, if you're choosing someone who's maybe got a different experience level or a different background level in terms of the way they shoot, in terms of the types of photos you'll get is going to be very different. And then there can be different elements in terms of, do they tether? So tether is where they can use a cable to attach from their camera. So from the body of the camera goes to a laptop, and they can, first of all, you can see live view. So sometimes photographers will put it on live view so you can see literally what's happening, and you can move something and you can see it live on the laptop, what's happening. And so you don't have to look through the little viewfinder so that's the tethering process. And it's also a way that then they would take the photo and the photo will read straight to the laptop. And some photographers don't like to do that. When you tether, it can be good in a sort of team kind of sense, but it can also slow the process down a lot. There are also photographers who use lots of lighting equipment. Generally, interior photographers who work in an editorial sense don't use much, if any, lighting. It tends to be that natural light is preferred because that gives a much more inviting atmosphere versus using flash or lights, which give a much different look and feel. And then there's like the bag of tricks that different photographers have, such as using things such as silks, which they will use to diffuse light, and equipment. They might have things called C-stands, which can hold up the silks to block out the light, or, there's all different types of tricks that go into it. So it's really good to kind of have a base level of understanding of what type of photographer they are when you're choosing a photographer to work with. So the first big point of this episode is to really choose the right photographer for you and your project, because photographers all have not only different experience levels, but they've got different specialties in terms of what they choose. Now, it is not always the case that, you should only ever work with an interiors photographer. As I've said, I've worked with people who work on fashion and interiors, or come from a fashion background and are, people will choose them because they come to it with maybe a slightly more creative eye than an interiors photographer. Interiors photographers, sometimes, they shoot in a particular way and they always shoot that way. And so that can be great if you know exactly what you want and you want it to be a particular way. But when you start to get into campaign shoots, sometimes people want people with a different perspective on how they bring that to a shoot. So really thinking about in terms of how that photographer works and, what their background is. These are really good things. A good example I can think of is a friend of mine who's got an Airbnb. She actually used a wedding photographer, of all things. You would never think this. She used a wedding photographer to shoot her Airbnb because she loved the moodiness of the images that this wedding photographer used. And this can actually be a great way if you don't have a big budget and you can't afford somebody who, pitches themselves as an interiors photographer. You can use somebody who's got expertise perhaps in a different way, but maybe there's something about the way that they create their images that you really love that. And you could try them out, and they might be really excited about the opportunity to shoot interiors. Obviously, you want to be clear in terms of like how much they're going to be charging and what your expectations are. And you need to set some boundaries and expectations with them so that you are on the same page. And you need to have a very clear idea of what you're trying to achieve with your shoot as well. So what I would say is whatever type of photographer that you work with, you want to create a clear brief for them so that they know exactly what you want out of the shoot. And you know yourself, you know how many shots you want, you know the kind of, you've got references of those shots, you know what kind of angles you want, how much depth of field. You don't need to know the technical elements, but you need to be able to explain whether that's through references or through your own knowledge of exactly what you're trying to get out of this shoot. You need to understand how they work, like I said, if they are going to be bringing lots of equipment, and understand how they charge. If they are bringing lighting or if they are bringing an assistant, they will be charging for that. So you need to understand, they might say, oh, that's okay, I'll bring my assistant along. And if you don't have a very big budget, you're going to be paying for that assistant. So you might say to them, depending on the situation and the circumstances and the particular type of photographer, you might say, look, I have actually got a couple of assistants, and it could just be friends of yours who are going to help. So you don't need to bring your assistant. I'm happy to bring a couple of friends. Now, some photographers will insist upon having an assistant. So these are the types of conversations that you need to be having with them. So the second big idea that I want to share with you today is that the more that you prep ahead of your shoot, the smoother your shoot will run. So these are some of the things that I often do before a shoot, whether it is for a journal feature that we're going to be doing for my shop Imprint House, whether it is for one of my books, whether it's for when I've done shoots for magazines, it's really important to get scouting photos if you are shooting somebody else's home. So if you are doing some kind of brand campaign, maybe you're working as an interior stylist and you need to shoot some product for a particular brand, you need to find some locations. So you really need to get what are often referred to as scouting photos. These are simply reaching out to the homeowner or the location and getting photos of the space. And you really want to have a mix of pulled back shots and detail shots. Sometimes people will only show you the photos, like the best little bits or the best little corners or what they think that you might be interested in. But really what you want more than anything is pulled back shots so you can get a sense of the overall space, and you can make informed decisions then about where you can shoot within the space, how much space you have to move around. When a space is very small, it gets very challenging moving around the space in terms of, with equipment. If you've got you and a photographer, they've got an assistant, maybe you've got an assistant. So that becomes more challenging when you are in very small spaces. Whereas if you ask for these pull back shots, you can start to get a sense of the space. You can get a sense of the light. You can have a sense of what furniture or objects do they already have to hand. So you know what you might need to supplement in terms of sourcing. You can go and do what's called a recce, which is when you go and visit somebody's home and you can go and take a look at what it looks like. This can be a great opportunity to connect with the homeowner, but it's not always necessary. It really depends on your schedule. I would do this sometimes, but not all the time. It really depended on if I was uncertain perhaps about whether the home would work as a location or as a house feature. And so sometimes I would do that in that regard. Or if I was uncertain if the light was going to be good. So it might just be a quick check-in. But you've obviously always got to be conscious of your time. The more time you spend on things like that, then you're not necessarily being paid to do that. But if you feel like it's a touch and go situation and you don't have the confidence or you're not quite sure if it's the best place to shoot, going and checking it out can maybe save you a lot of heartache at the end of a shoot when you think, yeah, this really is not going to make the cut. Just quickly, you know that I don't run ads on this podcast, so my only ask from you is that you can help me spread the word so that we can help other creatives on their journey. Because not only does everyone deserve to create a home that makes them feel good and make life better, but you can also help someone who is trying to earn a living doing what they love, support their families, and create a business that can have a positive impact on the world. And the best way we can do that is if you can rate and review and share this podcast. It just takes a couple of seconds or just one thumb tap. Not only do you help make this podcast possible, but more importantly, this simple act can help transform the life of someone else. So other things to really watch out for ahead of a shoot is to learn and understand about the aspect of the home. So this is understanding what type of natural light the home gets, particularly in relation to the key living areas where you will probably be shooting the most, such as the kitchen, living, dining areas. What is the aspect within Australia? You want to be ideally having a northern aspect or northeasterly aspect. And in the northern hemisphere, then it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be you want like a southerly aspect. And that is going to help you have the best amount of light. Whereas for instance, if those areas are east facing, then yes, you might get the morning sun. It might be what's called very hot light. So that's when it really blows out. And that's where you get this sort of effect on, like you really see like that sun streaming in, which can be lovely if you're sitting there. But what happens in a photo is you actually end up losing a lot of information in the photo in those situations. So you really want to kind of have more of a softer light throughout the photo shoot in general. Again, it depends on your brief, but understanding the aspect, and it can adjust, particularly in winter months where you might have a shorter period of time to shoot. So you might want to find out, okay, what's the aspect? When is it starting to get light in those key areas? Because you might even say, look, can we start at 8 o'clock? And that gives you time to set up so that by the time 9 o'clock rolls round, then you've done your recce, you've done some test shots, and you're really ready to go. Something else that you want to really do ahead of a shoot is check the weather forecast. It might sound obvious, but it is something that can get easily overlooked. You want to ideally avoid rainy days where the light is very low. While you don't want that harsh light, you also don't want very, very low light because again, depending on the brief of your shoot, it can get very moody, very dark. And if you want to get the most life and longevity out of your imagery, you really want to have what we call trans-seasonal imagery. So this means that the photos, the images, that somebody could be looking at them in summer or they could be looking at them in winter, and there isn't an obvious clue necessarily about, this was shot in high summer. So those types of images, you can use them more on social media. You can use them more on your website. If you're creating a book, obviously, it applies at any time of year, unless of course you've got like chapters on seasonal things, or you've got a journal or a blog post about seasonal collections. And you might do, the last days of summer or a summer shoot, and you can do those things. But obviously those trans-seasonal images you're going to get a lot more mileage out of them. You also want to, as part of this preparation stage, to create a shot list. This is something that I always do, even if it's now, I can often do it in my own head, but I still will write it out often because it's amazing when you're in the middle of a shoot, and particularly if you're struggling with a particular shot, you can easily overlook, I was going to shoot that chair in that spot, or I was going to get the homeowner in the kitchen, or I was going to do this, this, and this. So to write down all the shots, particularly if you've got portraits, it's really helpful. And again, really makes you get the most out of your shoot. Just on portraits as well, I would suggest to you, what we often do is ask the homeowner if they would like to have those done first, and then we can get it out of the way, and then they can go on and do their own thing, and they don't have to be hanging around. And often it's a good idea if they're not hanging around, because that can really slow you down, particularly if you've got a long shot list to get through. And make sure as well that you've got lots of inspirational references for your shot list. If you want things shot in a particular style, with a particular light, with a particular angle, you really want to get references for those and have them handy for the different shots. So I will go to the length of creating a like a storyboard or a shot list document whereby I specify, this is my reference, this is the shot, this is the location, and I've got all of those things in one document. All right, so let's go on to the third key idea that I wanted to talk to you about today, and that is really about making the most of your shoot day. So first of all, make sure that you are, I'm going to add an extra one here, not in my notes, which is, get a good night's sleep. It's so important to really be, refreshed in terms of you've had a good night's sleep. You're not, you haven't been burning the midnight oil, although I have done that on the shoot. And honestly, by the end of this shoot, you're so exhausted. So, have a good night's sleep, be well fed, hydrated, caffeinated if you drink coffee, so that you've done all of those things. Bring water with you, bring snacks, because sometimes you might have to work through lunch, and just to have, even if it's an apple or it's something, some nuts, whatever it is for you, so that you can keep going and you don't have to stop, or maybe lunch. So often on shoots, I will just be eating on the go. We don't necessarily stop for lunch. Sometimes with photography, it really depends on the photographer and the context. Some photographers that I work with, they just like to shoot through and they just want to get out of there. Other photographers like to take a leisurely lunch, and you're kind of like, okay, let's get back to it. So it really depends on the context and the person and your relationship with that person as well. On big set shoots, they have these long lunches, and it's like, oh my gosh, come on, let's just get this work done. I'd rather have a shorter lunch or just quickly eat something and be finished by 5 or 6 o'clock, not be shooting till 8 o'clock at night. So it really depends on the situation and the circumstances. Be well clothed. And by that, I mean, I really recommend wearing flat shoes, comfortable clothes. Yes, that sounds boring, but when you are on a shoot, you don't want to be faffing around with your clothes. I kind of laugh when I see photos of like some people who are kind of supposedly styling spaces, and they're wearing like high heels and like these elaborate ball gown style dresses. And I think, yeah, that's like, if you were really styling a shoot wearing those clothes, it would take you about 3 times as long. So any working stylist, you're generally wearing something like jeans, anything or shorts, something that you can put your phone in your pocket is really helpful. I mean, when I was doing the big studio shoots, I would often have masking tape around my wrist, like a bangle. So I always had it handy. I'd have like a Sharpie or a Texter in one of my pockets as well. So just like having your hands free, being able to run around, being able to run up and down stairs. You want to be like flexible, nimble, be able to react quickly, move quickly, be able to like, sometimes you got your bum in the air for the photographer because you're having to hold something for them or whatever. Like you need to be able to wear clothes that are really practical, and like you don't have to worry about what you're looking like. So that's just a little tip for you. I would also suggest as well, in terms of making the most of your shoot day, arrive early, because particularly if you're working as a stylist in this kind of capacity, it gives you the opportunity to park as close to the front door as possible, unload your things. If there's a covered area, sometimes I will, and I'll mention this obviously to the homeowner if I am going to be getting there early, or, and so I can unload my car, get my assistants if I've got assistants with me, unload the car, get the stuff as close to the front door as possible. It depends, sometimes you have to go and shoot, like you're going to have to park your car, down the road, particularly if it's in a city where parking is really hard to find and you have to move your car every couple of hours, or, it really depends on the circumstances of where you are parking and where you're actually shooting. But you want to be able to get to a point where if you arrive early, not only can you get your things organized, but it also just gives you the opportunity to kind of get your head around the space itself. And it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's this type of house. Or you can have a sense of, if it's on a property, like, oh, this is much bigger than I thought it was. Or, you might even see some shot ideas that you think, oh, it'd be really cute to shoot the front door. So it just helps you give that little bit of time to think about the shoot in relation to your expectations of what the space might have been like as well. When you actually get there, and particularly when the photographer turns up, you want to do what's called a walkthrough. So this is just basically a process whereby you are going through with the photographer and, you're both kind of gauging, okay, yeah, we can do this shot here. This would be good for the portrait. They might even rattle off a few test shots so that you can get an idea of, yep, that would be really great. You might see something and think, oh, I didn't realize they had that. I want to capture that. So you do that. It can take, 10, 15 minutes, sometimes even less, but it just helps you and the photographer be on the same page. And then you really want to, in that time, really determine which are the best rooms or spaces to shoot. Make sure you got your shot list handy. Again, this is why having pockets is handy, or you might have it on the notes app of your phone. I actually prefer to have just it written out because then I can kind of tick it off. I like the old school way of doing it in that sense. And then while you are shooting, just really make sure that you keep an eye on the time. If you've got a certain amount of shots that you're trying to get through, you really want to make sure that you are going at a certain pace and a certain rhythm. And sometimes those first one or two shots can take a long time because you and the photographer, particularly if you haven't worked together before, you're getting used to each other, how each other is working. They're trying to gauge if you're happy with what they're doing. You're trying to kind of communicate to them what you want out of the shot. So if they start to go really slow in terms of, the amount of time that it's taking, then you really want to sort of say, okay, I'm happy with that. There comes a point where you need to say, okay, it's time to move on. And you just need to be conscious of your time. And also there might come a point as well is if it's getting towards the end of the shoot and you feel like you've still got a lot of shots to go, it comes to a point where you start to have to make calls on which shots or images are the most important for you to get, because if you don't have those, then you're going to be stuck in some capacity. You want to make sure you're getting all the key spaces. So you might get towards like 2 hours from the end and say, look, we're starting to run out of time. These are the ones that I really want to prioritize and make sure that you're focusing on them. So they are the main kind of key areas. So it's really about choosing the right photographer for you and your project, putting time into the preparation so that you're making the most out of your time and making the most out of your shoot, and then making the most of the actual shoot day in terms of how you show up, doing the work with the photographer, keeping things on track so that you get the best possible result and have fun. I mean, I actually love photo shoot days. I love working photographers. So many of them are such fun people to work with. I've had great relationships with them. Some of them are still really good friends. And it is a lot of fun. And you spend so much time together on that day. It's one of those rare things that you probably don't work hand in hand with another person like throughout an entire day in any other capacity. And you start talking about all sorts of things, but just keep it moving, keep it moving. Photographers laughed at me because I like to push things along because I always have a long shot list, but it's so much fun. And I just wanted to share this because I realized when I was talking to one of the students within Design and Grow that it is so important to really have this kind of knowledge ahead of a shoot to really make the most out of it. So as I said, this has been like kind of quite industry speak, very specific. I would love to hear, has this been helpful? Has this been useful? Would you like more of these types of episodes? If so, please send me a DM on Instagram at Natalie Walton. As always, if you've been listening to the show for a while, make sure that you hit follow so you don't miss an episode. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, then I would love for you to, also hit that follow button. And either of you can please leave a 5-star rating or a review. This is episode 175. If you would like to reference that. And as always, really appreciate you listening. and being here with me on the podcast today. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope it is something that you can bookmark or save for a time when you might have a photo shoot, or if you know of anyone who's got a photo shoot coming up, be sure to share it with them, because like I said, these are the lessons I have learned over the past 15 years plus of doing this. So again, hope it's been helpful. Have a beautiful week. All of the links and info for this episode are at nataliewalton.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can get a direct download of the latest episode. And I really appreciate when you take a minute to rate and review, as well as share the love with someone you know who might benefit from this episode, or on social media. If you'd like to access a range of free resources, come visit my website, nataliewalton.com. Thank you to Jaeger Media for producing this podcast. And I would also like to acknowledge the people of the Bundjalung Nation where it was recorded, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I look forward to connecting again soon. I'm Natalie Walton, and you've been listening to Imprint.